It was a chilly autumn morning in the small town of Willowbrook, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm maple syrup. The diner, known as Millie's Place, was already bustling with locals who frequented it every morning, exchanging laughs, stories, and updates on their families. Millie's Place was more than just a diner. It was where the heartbeat of the community could be felt. People knew each other, sometimes too well, but in a way that made them feel more like family than neighbors. Old friends caught up at the counter while newcomers quickly became familiar faces. Among the early regulars was Marcus, a tall, middle-aged black man who worked at an auto repair shop just down the road. Marcus had the kind of warm presence that made others gravitate toward him. He was the kind of person who would take off his own coat to help someone in need. The diner staff, and most of the regulars, loved him. He'd been coming here every morning for years, always ordering the same hearty breakfast, greeting everyone with a smile, and sharing small acts of kindness that went beyond just words. Marcus stepped into Millie's Place that morning, greeted by Lisa, the friendly waitress who had been serving him since his very first visit. She flashed him a warm smile, already knowing his order before he even had to say it. "The usual, Marcus?" she asked, and he nodded with a grin. He sat at his favorite booth near the window, where he could look out over the sleepy town streets as the sun peeked over the horizon. It seemed like just another regular morning, filled with the quiet comfort of familiarity. But today there was something different about the atmosphere. Marcus noticed a man he'd never seen before, standing by the entrance with a stiff posture and a serious expression. He looked out of place, a bit too formal, with a clipboard in hand, as he scrutinized the scene in front of him with a critical eye. The man, Rick, was the new manager hired to boost the diner's productivity. As the owner had explained, Rick was new to Willowbrook, a transplant from a big city with ambitious plans and a strict approach to business. His first few weeks on the job had already unsettled some of the staff. He'd implemented new rules, focusing on increasing efficiency and maximizing profits, ideas that didn't sit well with Millie's Place's easygoing, community-focused culture. Rick had heard from the owner, Ben, that this diner was a second home to many, but he didn't buy into the sentimental value. To him, it was just a job, a place to make money, and he'd made it clear he wouldn't tolerate people who loitered or distracted the staff. As Marcus sat down, Rick watched him with a look that Marcus recognized all too well, a cold, evaluative stare that sized him up without a hint of warmth. Rick approached Marcus's booth with a tight expression, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "Sir," Rick said, his tone clipped and professional, "this isn't a place to sit around unless you're ordering something. We're not running a charity here." Marcus was taken aback. He looked up at Rick, meeting his gaze with confusion and a touch of hurt. "I always order breakfast," Marcus replied, keeping his voice calm and steady, even as he felt a pang of humiliation at being spoken to like this in his own town. "I've been coming here for years." Rick wasn't swayed. He crossed his arms and replied, "I've noticed people hanging around here too much. If you're not eating, I'll have to ask you to leave. We're a business, not a gathering place." The other patrons began to take notice. Conversations paused, forks were set down, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Lisa, who had been watching from behind the counter, quickly came over, trying to intervene. "Rick, this is Marcus. He's a regular. He's been coming here longer than most of us have been working," she explained, hoping to diffuse the situation. Rick shook his head, stubbornly clinging to his authority. "That doesn't matter. Rules are rules. Regular or not, if he's not ordering, he can't stay," he insisted, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus, maintaining his composure, slowly stood up. He could feel the eyes of the other customers on him, some sympathetic, others visibly angry at Rick's attitude. Marcus had never wanted to be the center of attention, and he certainly didn't want to cause a scene. He turned to Lisa, offering her a gentle smile of reassurance. "It's okay, Lisa." "I'll go," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of sorrow. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and placed them on the table, preparing to leave without a fight. The room felt tense, charged with an emotion that no one quite knew how to express. As Marcus made his way toward the door, several customers stood up, some muttering in anger. One of the older patrons, a man who had known Marcus since childhood, spoke up, his voice laced with indignation. "Rick, you're making a mistake. Marcus is like family to all of us. He's done more for this town than you could ever understand." Rick's expression wavered, but he held his ground, unwilling to back down in front of so many people. He shrugged, acting as if he was just doing his job, but inside, he was beginning to sense that he might have miscalculated. Marcus paused at the door, looking back at the familiar faces he'd shared so many mornings with, and gave them a small, appreciative nod before stepping outside. After Marcus walked out of Millie's place, a heavy silence lingered, as if the diner itself was holding its breath. The morning felt tainted, the warmth that usually filled the room replaced by a cold unease. Rick noticed the change, though he acted indifferent, trying to keep up his stoic facade as he went back to checking his clipboard. Yet he could feel the weight of disapproving stares from the patrons and staff. It wasn't long before the murmurs began to grow louder. People were upset, whispering among themselves, questioning Rick's decision, and expressing frustration at how he treated Marcus, someone they all considered family. A few regulars left their meals half-finished, shaking their heads in disgust as they stood up to leave, signaling their silent protest. For some, it was an act of solidarity, while others left because they simply couldn't enjoy their breakfast in the wake of what they had witnessed. Rick watched, unsure of how to respond. But he maintained his stubborn resolve, convinced he was simply upholding the rules. In his mind, he was making tough decisions that others couldn't understand, cleaning up the diner and enforcing order, even if it meant ruffling a few feathers. But beneath his cold exterior, a flicker of doubt began to creep in, a nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had overstepped. Lisa, the waitress, couldn't keep silent any longer. She marched over to Rick, her usual gentle demeanor replaced with a fierce determination. "Rick," she began, her voice low but full of restrained anger, "what you did to Marcus was out of line. You have no idea who he is, what he means to everyone here." Rick looked at her, momentarily caught off guard by her intensity. He tried to brush her off with a dismissive wave of his hand, but Lisa wasn't having it. "You've been here, what, a month?" she continued, her voice gaining strength as the other staff members and customers listened closely. "Marcus has been coming here every morning for years. He's more than just a customer. He's part of this place. People come here because of the connections they have, not just for a meal." Rick's face reddened with frustration. "Look, Lisa," he said tersely, "I'm just doing my job. I'm trying to improve this place, make it profitable, and that means enforcing some discipline. I can't let people treat this diner like a free gathering spot." His tone was resolute, but there was a slight waver in his voice as he spoke, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince her. Lisa shook her head, unable to hide her disappointment. "You don't get it, Rick. It's not about rules or profits. Millie's place isn't just a business, it's a home to people. And Marcus, he's practically family." A few customers nodded in agreement, and one older woman, a regular known for her fiery spirit, chimed in. "You know, young man, we've seen plenty of managers come and go, but this diner has always been a place for friends and neighbors. If you don't understand that, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." Her words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife, and Rick felt a pang of resentment mixed with shame. But he didn't respond. He clenched his jaw, standing there rigidly, feeling more isolated and out of place than he ever had. Meanwhile, outside the diner, Marcus was making his way down the quiet, tree-lined street. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, his head slightly bowed. The hurt he felt ran deep. It wasn't just about being asked to leave. It was about the lack of respect, the feeling of being judged unfairly in a place he considered a second home. For Marcus, Millie's place had always been more than a diner. It was where he'd come to share in the daily lives of the townsfolk, to laugh, to comfort, to listen. He'd seen couples meet here, watched children grow up, celebrated milestones, and mourned losses with his friends over countless cups of coffee. Today, that sense of belonging had been shattered, and the pain was raw. Back in the diner, Lisa took a deep breath, glancing around at the remaining customers. The sense of solidarity was strong. People were still talking in hushed tones, expressing their frustration, their anger, their disbelief. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. In that moment, Lisa decided to act. She slipped out from behind the counter, pushing through the front door, and hurried down the street to catch up with Marcus. She found him a few blocks away, sitting on a bench by the park, staring out at the autumn leaves scattered on the ground. "Marcus," she called gently as she approached, her voice filled with empathy. He looked up, surprised but grateful to see her. Lisa sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap, choosing her words carefully. "I'm so sorry for what happened. I don't know what got into him. That's not how we treat people here." Marcus managed a small, tired smile. "It's okay, Lisa," he replied quietly. "I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I just didn't expect it, that's all. I thought this place was different." Lisa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with compassion. "It is different, Marcus. You mean so much to all of us. And trust me, we won't just stand by and let someone treat you like that. You've always been here for us, and now it's our turn to stand up for you." Marcus nodded, touched by her words. He took a deep breath, his gaze shifting back to the park as he tried to collect his thoughts. As Lisa sat beside him, they were both unaware of the ripple effects the morning's events were already causing. News of what had happened was spreading through the town, from the patrons who had witnessed it to their friends, and soon enough, it reached the ears of the diner's owner, Ben. He was at his house when a friend called him, explaining what had taken place and how Marcus had been asked to leave. Ben's face darkened as he listened, disbelief turning to anger. Marcus wasn't just a customer. He was his younger brother, though most people didn't know. Marcus was a private man, humble and reserved, and he never used his family connections to gain any special treatment. For him, being at Millie's place was about community, not status. Ben stood up, grabbed his keys, and without a second thought, headed to the diner. His mind raced, frustration building as he imagined his brother. A man he respeth bell above the diner's door jingled as Ben walked in, his face a mixture of determination and simmering anger. He was a quiet, dignified man, known around town for his fairness and gentle demeanor. He had built Millie's place from the ground up with his late wife, Millie, and over the years, it had become a sanctuary for the townsfolk, a place where everyone was welcome, no matter who they were or what they looked like. Millie had always believed that kindness was the most important ingredient in any recipe, and Ben had carried on that legacy after she passed. But today, walking into the nearly empty diner, Ben felt an unusual tightness in his chest, a kind of heartbreak he hadn't expected to feel within the walls of his own business. The regulars who remained in the diner immediately turned to look at him, some nodding solemnly, others giving him sympathetic looks. They knew Ben was here to address what had happened, and they watched as he walked directly to Rick, who was standing at the counter, clearly unsettled by the atmosphere, but trying to maintain his composure. Rick turned to face Ben, surprised by the steely look in his eyes. It was a side of Ben that few had ever seen. "Rick," Ben started, his voice low and steady, though there was a noticeable edge to it. "I heard about what happened this morning. Care to explain it to me?" The question was simple, but it carried an undeniable weight. Rick shifted uncomfortably, struggling to find the right words. He hadn't expected to be confronted so quickly, especially not by the owner himself. "Well, sir," he began hesitantly, "I was just enforcing the policy." Marcus was lingering, and I thought it was important to make sure we didn't have anyone just, you know, taking up space without buying anything. I was only following the rules." Ben's jaw tightened, and he took a deep breath before responding. "Rules," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The only rule I care about here is treating people with respect. Millie's place has never been just a business, Rick. This place was built on the idea that everyone who walks through that door is part of our family. And Marcus, well, he's more family to me than anyone else." Rick blinked, confused. "I didn't realize he was, related to you, sir," he stammered, clearly caught off guard. Ben's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a softer but more intense tone. "You didn't know because Marcus doesn't go around flaunting that he's my brother. He's here because he loves this place, just like everyone else who comes here. You saw a man you didn't know and judged him based on nothing but assumptions." Rick felt a sudden wave of shame washing over him, but his pride wouldn't let him fully admit it. He tried to salvage his argument, his voice growing defensive. "Sir, I was just doing my job, trying to make sure the diner runs smoothly. I've worked hard to keep things organized here, and sometimes that means making tough calls." Ben shook his head, disappointment evident in his eyes. "A tough call would have been dealing with a real issue, Rick. What you did was turn away a good man, someone who has given more to this community than most people ever will. Marcus isn't just my brother. He's a pillar in this town. And you decided, in your so-called professional judgment, that he didn't belong here." The remaining patrons watched in silence, some nodding in agreement, others shooting disapproving glances at Rick. A few of the waitstaff stood nearby, their expressions a mixture of relief and satisfaction as Ben voiced what they'd all been feeling. Rick's face flushed with embarrassment, and he struggled to maintain eye contact with Ben. "I didn't know, sir. I didn't mean to disrespect anyone," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Ben continued, his voice unwavering. "You know, when I started this diner with Millie, we made a promise to each other. We promised that this place would always be a home for people, a place where everyone could feel welcome. It was never just about money or rules. Millie believed that treating people with kindness was more important than any policy, and I've tried to honor that every day since she passed. What you did today went against everything she stood for, everything we stand for here." There was a long, heavy pause. Rick looked down, his hands fidgeting nervously as he tried to absorb Ben's words. He had thought he was just enforcing policies, but now he realized how blind he had been to the spirit of the place. The weight of his actions began to settle in, and he felt an uncomfortable prickling at the back of his neck as the reality of his mistake became clear. At that moment, the front door opened again, and Marcus stepped back inside, having returned from his walk with Lisa by his side. He had seen Ben's car parked outside and decided to come back. Unsure of what to expect, but knowing he couldn't avoid facing the situation. As Marcus walked in, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. The remaining customers watched with hopeful anticipation, some of them visibly relieved to see him back. Ben turned to his brother, a look of warmth and apology in his eyes. "Marcus," he said softly, stepping forward to embrace him. The two brothers shared a silent moment, their bond unspoken but clear to everyone watching. It was a moment of reconciliation, a quiet acknowledgement of the love and respect they held for each other. Rick stood there, watching the scene unfold, feeling more out of place than ever. He realized that he had not only disrespected Marcus, but had also failed to understand the essence of the diner itself. Slowly, he took a step forward, swallowing his pride, and cleared his throat. "Marcus, I'm sorry," he began, his voice shaky but genuine. "I didn't realize, I didn't know who you were, but that doesn't excuse how I acted. I was wrong to treat you like that, and I'm sorry for the disrespect." Marcus looked at Rick, his expression calm and thoughtful. He had always been a forgiving man, but this moment was about more than just personal forgiveness. It was about setting an example for everyone present. "Thank you, Rick," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I appreciate the apology." As the day wore on, the atmosphere at Millie's place gradually returned to its warm and welcoming state. The clinking of coffee mugs, the hum of chatter, and the laughter of regulars filled the room once again. But something felt different. It was as if the morning's incident had cast a new light over the diner, drawing everyone closer and reminding them of the diner's true purpose. Rick, however, was a changed man after his confrontation with Ben and his apology to Marcus. Though he resumed his duties with his usual sense of responsibility, he couldn't shake the feeling of regret that gnawed at him. He was grateful that Marcus had accepted his apology, yet he knew that trust and respect were not things that could be mended with a single apology. He would have to earn them, both from Marcus and from the community. Determined to set things right, Rick decided to take the first step by reaching out to the people he had wronged, hoping to show them he was committed to understanding the diner's spirit. Throughout the afternoon, he made small efforts, checking in with customers, listening to their stories, and attempting to bridge the gap that had grown between him and the regulars. At first, his attempts were met with guarded politeness. The regulars were courteous but clearly cautious, unsure if Rick's change was genuine or just an act to save face. But Rick remained patient, accepting their hesitancy and recognizing that building trust would take time. Meanwhile, Marcus had noticed Rick's efforts and quietly appreciated his sincerity. For Marcus, forgiveness came easily, but he also understood the weight of redemption and knew that Rick would have to put in the work to repair the bonds he had frayed. As the hours passed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the significance of what had transpired. The incident hadn't just impacted him, it had stirred something within the entire town. The people of Willowbrook, though a close-knit community, had always harbored underlying tensions, remnants of old prejudices and misconceptions. But today, in the wake of Rick's misstep and the subsequent apology, Marcus sensed a shift, a subtle but meaningful change that seemed to open the door for healing and unity. As evening approached, a few of the townsfolk began gathering outside Millie's place, drawn by a sense of solidarity and purpose. Word had spread through the town about the events of the morning, and by now, almost everyone knew what had happened. Some of the regulars who had left in protest returned, bringing friends and family, their presence a quiet but powerful show of support for Marcus. Soon, the diner was filled with people who came not just to eat but to show their solidarity, to affirm the values of kindness and inclusivity that Millie's place had always represented. The diner buzzed with energy as friends, neighbors, and strangers alike shared stories, reconnected, and embraced the spirit of community. Rick watched in awe as the crowd grew, realizing the deep connection that Millie's place held for the town. It was more than just a business. It was the soul of Willowbrook, a place where memories were made and relationships nurtured. Seeing the outpouring of support for Marcus, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that if he was going to be part of this place, he couldn't just manage it. He had to be a part of its legacy, its warmth, and its values. He made a silent vow to honor the diner's mission, not just in words but through his actions, day by day. Ben noticed Rick standing near the counter, watching the scene unfold with a mix of wonder and humility. Sensing that Rick might be feeling overwhelmed, Ben walked over and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Ben said, his voice soft but filled with pride. Rick nodded, his eyes taking in the lively crowd. "I didn't understand it before, but I think I do now. This place, it's not just a diner, is it? It's like a heartbeat for this town." Ben smiled, his gaze drifting over the bustling tables, where people laughed, shared stories, and celebrated life's little moments. "You're right, Rick. Millie's place was always meant to be more than just a business. It's a refuge, a home, a place where people can come as they are and find acceptance. That's why we built it, and that's why we keep it going, even when it's hard." Rick took a deep breath, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. "I want to be a part of that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to make things right." Ben gave him an encouraging nod. "You will, Rick. Just remember, it's about more than following policies. It's about understanding people, connecting with them, and being willing to learn from your mistakes." Rick nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could start making amends, how he could begin to earn the trust of this community. As the evening wore on, Marcus noticed Rick's quiet resolve and decided it was time for a gesture of his own. He approached Rick, extending a hand in friendship. "I appreciate your apology, Rick," he said warmly. "And I can see you're trying to understand what this place means to us. That's all any of us can ask for." Rick grasped Marcus's hand, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus. I won't take this second chance lightly." The two men shared a moment of mutual respect, and the crowd, sensing the reconciliation, erupted into applause. Lissa clapped her hands excitedly, grinning from ear to ear, and a few of the regulars even cheered. The diner felt alive with an energy that transcended mere forgiveness. It was a celebration of unity, of the community coming together to uphold the values they cherished. In the following days, Rick worked hard to earn back the trust he had nearly lost. He spent extra time talking to customers, getting to know their stories, and learning the rhythms of the town. He organized small events at the diner, inviting locals to share their experiences and make Millie's place feel even more like home. He even started a community breakfast special on Saturday mornings, where locals could come in for a discounted meal, encouraging more people to gather and connect. The transformation wasn't easy. Some days were challenging, and not everyone was quick to warm up to him. But Rick was patient, persistent, and genuine in his efforts. Slowly, he found himself becoming a part of the town's fabric, woven into the lives of the people he once viewed as mere customers. He learned their names, remembered their favorite dishes, and began to understand the importance of kindness in ways he had never considered before. Marcus, too, continued to visit Millie's place, sitting at his usual booth and greeting Rick with a nod and a smile. They often exchanged quiet conversations, sharing stories of their lives and exchanging thoughts on the future of the diner. The bond between them grew, not just as patron and manager, but as friends who had walked through fire and come out the other side with a deeper respect for each other. Months passed, and one morning, as Rick looked around the bustling diner, he felt a profound sense of belonging. He was no longer an outsider enforcing rules. He was a part of something greater, a guardian of the community's spirit. Millie's place had become a home to him, just as it was to everyone else, and he knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together, united by the simple but powerful belief that kindness, above all, was the foundation of their lives. The transformation of Millie's place over the following months became a quiet, profound miracle for Willowbrook. Word of the incident that had once divided the diner quickly turned into a story of redemption and unity, a tale passed around not only in the diner but throughout the town. Millie's place had always been a beloved spot, but now it took on a new, almost sacred meaning, a symbol of what Willowbrook stood for: compassion, forgiveness, and the strength of community bonds. People who'd never been regulars started stopping by, drawn by curiosity and the warmth that radiated from within the small diner's walls. Locals told their families, brought their friends, and soon Millie's place became a gathering place, not just for its loyal patrons but for the entire town. Rick was at the heart of this transformation, though he remained humble about his role. He was there every morning before dawn, sweeping the floors, double-checking the inventory, and preparing the diner for its day. What had once been a job he approached with cold professionalism became a labor of love. He knew the rhythm of the place now, the way it started slow and quiet, with a handful of early birds sipping their coffee, and then gradually filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking dishes, and familiar voices sharing pieces of their lives with each other. Rick began taking personal interest in the lives of the regulars. He learned about Martha's weekly knitting group, Henry's grandkids' upcoming visit, and Fiona's plan to open her own little flower shop down the street. These small moments, these glimpses into people's lives, were no longer trivial to him. They were the lifeblood of Millie's place, and he realized that he had become part of a much larger story. One day, Ben came in just after the lunch rush and found Rick sitting at the counter, taking a rare moment to catch his breath. Ben took a seat beside him, his eyes scanning the room with pride. He looked at Rick, who was wiping his hands with a napkin, a tired but contented look on his face. "You've done good here, Rick," Ben said, patting him on the shoulder. "I don't think I've ever seen this place so full of life." Rick chuckled, shaking his head in modesty. "I think the place just has that effect on people," he replied. But Ben shook his head knowingly. "Maybe," he said, "but I think you've had a lot to do with it too. You've brought something special to Millie's place. Rick, it's not just about keeping things in order. It's about showing people that they belong here." Ben's words stirred something in Rick, a sense of validation he hadn't known he was seeking. For so long, he had thought of himself as an outsider in Willowbrook, a city transplant trying to impose his big city standards on a small-town gem. But now he felt rooted, connected to the people around him in a way that was as real as the counter beneath his hands. He didn't respond right away, simply nodding as he looked around the diner, seeing it through new eyes, a place he'd once thought he was here to manage, but which had, in truth, managed to change him. In the evenings after closing time, Rick would often sit by himself in the empty diner, the lights dimmed, and the air still carrying faint traces of coffee and baked goods. He found himself reflecting on his journey, on the countless small but meaningful interactions that had shifted his understanding of what it meant to belong. He remembered his first encounter with Marcus, the misunderstanding that had set off this transformation. If he closed his eyes, he could almost see it playing out again. But this time, he saw it differently. Now he understood that his biases, his need for control, and his rigid adherence to rules had blinded him to the heart of this place. The incident had been a painful lesson, but one that he was grateful for, a chance to break down the walls he'd unknowingly built around himself. One evening, Marcus joined him in the quiet diner after closing, carrying 2 cups of coffee and sliding one over to Rick. They'd developed a deep bond over the months, an unspoken friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, glancing at Rick thoughtfully. "You know, I never thought I'd see this place come alive the way it has lately," Marcus said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's like it's got a soul all its own." Rick nodded, feeling a pang of warmth at Marcus's words. "I think it always had a soul," he replied. "I was just too stubborn to see it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Then Marcus spoke, his tone more serious. "You know, Rick, a lot of folks in this town have been through some tough times. They come here because it's safe, because it's familiar. You gave them that, and you didn't even realize it." Rick felt a lump form in his throat. "I think it's you they come for, Marcus. You've been that steady presence, the friend everyone knows they can rely on." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe. But it takes more than one person to keep a place like this alive. It's everyone, all of us. Even you, Rick." As the weeks passed, Rick found that Millie's place had become a sort of haven not only for the townsfolk, but for him as well. He learned to see each day as an opportunity to connect, to serve, and to be a part of something that transcended him. He organized small gatherings in the diner, storytelling nights where people could share tales of their own lives, music nights where local musicians could play for an intimate crowd, and even a community meal where anyone, no matter their circumstances, could enjoy a free meal on the house. These gatherings brought a new energy to the diner, filling it with laughter, music, and shared memories. Families brought their children, who played and laughed as they made new friends, and older folks shared stories from their past, creating a tapestry of shared experience that covered the walls of Millie's place like an invisible mural. Through it all, Rick worked tirelessly, but now his exhaustion was filled with purpose. The community grew to trust him, to embrace him as one of their own. Marcus and Ben watched with pride, seeing Rick's journey come full circle, transforming him from a strict, rule-bound manager into a true pillar of the community, a friend who had earned his place not through authority, but through compassion and understanding. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Rick noticed a new plaque hanging near the entrance of Millie's place. It was small and unassuming, but its message was clear and powerful. The words read, "This diner was built on kindness and respect. All are welcome here, and all are family." Rick felt his throat tighten as he read the plaque, realizing that it was a reflection of the journey they had all taken together. The plaque was Millie's legacy, Ben's vision, Marcus's warmth, and Rick's own hard-earned lesson all rolled into one. The next morning, when Marcus walked into the diner, Rick greeted him with a smile and a fresh cup of coffee. Marcus took a sip, savoring the familiar warmth, and gave Rick a knowing look. "Looks like you found your place here, Rick." Rick nodded, a soft smile on his face. "Yeah, Marcus, I think I have." The regulars filled the diner, laughing, chatting, and enjoying their meals, completely unaware of the silent exchange between the two men. But that was the beauty of Millie's place. Its magic was subtle, woven into the fabric of everyday life, felt in the small moments of kindness that defined the lives of everyone who walked through its doors. As he looked around, Rick felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had come to Willowbrook as an outsider, a man with rigid ideas and a heart guarded by his own ambitions. But now he was a part of this town, a part of something timeless and beautiful. He knew that, like everyone else in Millie's place, he had a role to play in upholding its legacy of kindness and respect. And with that realization, he understood that he had found not just a job or a place to live, but a true home. In the days that followed, Rick continued to pour himself into the diner, not as a manager, but as a member of a family bound together by love, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that everyone, no matter who they were, deserved a place to belong. As the seasons changed, Millie's place settled into a new era, one marked by an enduring spirit of togetherness and compassion. Willowbrook residents spoke of the diner as if it were a cherished member of their family, a constant in their lives that had weathered the storms of the past and emerged stronger. Each person who walked through its doors knew that they were not just patrons but part of a living story. This legacy had been passed from Millie herself, through Ben's stewardship, through Marcus's quiet strength, and now through Rick's redemptive journey. Winter had brought with it a quiet beauty, snow blanketing the town and creating a soft hush over Willowbrook. Inside Millie's place, however, the warmth of the diner felt like a cozy refuge from the cold. The windows were decorated with twinkling lights and holiday garlands, and a small Christmas tree, covered in handmade ornaments contributed by customers over the years, sat proudly by the entrance. The diner had always been a beloved spot during the holiday season, but this year felt particularly special. People didn't just come to eat, they came to share stories, to reminisce, and to be a part of the diner's heartbeat, which pulsed even more vibrantly with the season's spirit of generosity. One evening, as snowflakes fell outside in a flurry of soft white, Rick looked around the bustling diner with a sense of awe. The tables were filled with families, friends, and even a few strangers who had wandered in to escape the cold. The atmosphere was charged with laughter and warmth. Children hung their paper snowflake crafts in the windows, elderly patrons exchanged holiday cards, and the regulars shared memories of holidays past. It was a scene that filled Rick's heart with a pride he had never anticipated. The diner was no longer just a place he managed. It had become a calling, a purpose, a place where he could make a real difference. Among the crowd, Marcus sat at his usual booth, sipping coffee and chatting with some of the regulars. His presence had always been a calming force in the diner, a steady reminder of resilience and kindness. Tonight, he looked over at Rick and gave him a nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had achieved together. Rick returned the nod, feeling a surge of gratitude for the friendship that had grown between them. a friendship that had weathered misunderstandings and emerged stronger, built on mutual respect and forgiveness. As the evening wore on, Rick felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a young woman, a single mother named Sarah, holding her son's hand. They had recently moved to Willowbrook, and though they were still new to the area, they had quickly become regulars at Millie's place. Sarah's son, a shy boy named Noah, clung to her side, his eyes wide with awe as he took in the bustling diner. "I just wanted to thank you, Rick," Sarah said, her voice warm and sincere. "This place, it's really helped us feel at home. Moving here was hard, but coming here every week, it makes us feel like we're part of something." Rick felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more to me than you know," he replied, giving Noah a friendly smile. He reached behind the counter and pulled out a small gingerbread cookie, handing it to the boy. "Merry Christmas, Noah," he said softly, watching as the boy's face lit up with joy. Moments like these reminded Rick of why he had come to love the diner and the community it served. This was what Millie's place was all about, offering a sense of belonging to everyone who walked through its doors. As he moved through the diner, Rick overheard snippets of conversations, each one a testament to the unique bonds that had formed here. "Remember last year when the power went out and we all stayed here, sharing hot cocoa by candlelight?" someone said, laughing. "Or that summer night when we had an impromptu barbecue in the parking lot because the grill broke?" Another voice chimed in. Rick smiled to himself, realizing that the diner wasn't just a place. It was a tapestry of memories, woven together by the people who loved it. Then, as the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, Ben arrived, carrying a small wrapped box. He walked over to Rick with a twinkle in his eye, placing the box in his hands. "Open it," Ben said, his voice filled with warmth. Rick carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a small brass plaque. Engraved on it were the words, "For Rick, who reminded us all what it means to truly belong." Rick stared at the plaque, his eyes misting over as he read the words. He looked up at Ben, feeling an overwhelming surge of gratitude and humility. Ben clapped him on the shoulder. "You've done something special here, Rick. You didn't just turn this place around, you gave it new life. You helped us remember why Millie's place matters, not just as a diner, but as a home for everyone." Rick struggled to find words, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Ben. I never thought. I never imagined." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Ben just smiled, understanding the depth of Rick's gratitude without needing any further explanation. As Rick held the plaque, Marcus joined them, grinning as he clapped Rick on the back. "Looks like you're officially part of the family now," he teased, his eyes twinkling with pride. "It's about time." The three men shared a quiet laugh, each of them feeling the significance of the moment. It was more than just a celebration. It was a recognition of everything they had built together, a testament to the power of forgiveness, community, and the transformative magic of kindness. Finally, as the last few patrons gathered their coats and prepared to leave, Rick took a deep breath, feeling an almost sacred